Hello and welcome to the Southbound Sports Show. I'm your host, Richie Leahy, here with my co-host, Maddie B. We got a big show today. College football expansion. I don't really have anything for high tempo because I'm too excited about expansion. So, Matt, do you have anything for high tempo before we get started?
Rip into it. Let's go.
My main thing that I want to bring up, I guess kind of my high tempo before we get into Florida State, is that Brett McMurphy put out that the Big 12 is safe right now because nobody wants any of their teams. And so we'll kick off with that. And the reason this has all been brought up, Florida State has a board of trustees meeting or something. You might know more. But at their meeting, they shared like the annual revenue or whatever of the football team and like their athletics department. And they compared it with the Big Ten and the SEC. And just to show how far behind they were. And they started to talk about uneven revenue sharing in the ACC. And if you know anything about the conferences, uneven revenue sharing is the death blow. If you do that, your conference is done. Because I like to think of conferences as like a marriage. Because like I always tell people, like, yo, you should get a prenup. Because if you're getting married, the prenup is basically saying you could break at any time. It's advantageous to both parties. Like you keep whatever you have, you keep both ways. So if you come in with money, you leave with the money. If you come in poor, whatever, you leave with the poor. That's how a college conference, I think, should be set up. When you start telling people like, hey, I'm going to come in, but I'm going to just take money from you. Like you marry rich and then you just start spending all the money like a smaller school. Of course, there's going to be some resentment. So finally, Florida State's fed up with it. And they're giving ultimatums. And in a marriage, that never works. You can't be throwing an ultimatum at your partner. Because the schools aren't going to want to keep with that. If you're like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to have to start taking some of your paycheck because I do too much work around here. I got to buy motorcycles and boats and things because we're cool, right? I'm the cool partner. We need to do flashy things. We need to win championships. I need championship rings. I need gold chains on. So I need some of your paycheck for that. And they're like, what the hell? I'm a teacher. I'm barely making anything. What are you talking about? You're a doctor. What are you doing? Why do you need my money? And so that's what Florida State's doing right now. And I'm telling you, it's not going to work out for the ACC. No matter what they decide, it's done. It's like, because now like the conference has to suspect them of cheating too, right? They're like, we know you've reached out to other conferences. And they're like, no, we haven't. And they're like, we know you have. Why else would you bring up the finances? Like, where have you been going on Friday night? You haven't been out with the boys. Where have you? I'm going to start tracking your phone. So that's the phase we're at, Matt. I want you to give me Florida State's perspective on it.
But I feel like when you look across all sports, Florida State's been consistently a good school for athletics. Football's been good. Baseball and softball have been good. Softball's won national championships recently. Soccer's won national championships. Basketball should have won the championship that COVID year. Across all, it's not like I feel like Clemson they've had this recent run of football success. But overall, they've kind of been a one-trick pony. They've been middle of the road. There's a reason we talked about Clemsoning. What other program has multiple sports that contribute? You know, when you're saying about the prenup, I think Florida State was the program that had the most to lose. So as you're going through some of that, it's like you got to find what's best for you. And if the ACC as a whole can't support your growth, you got to go where the money is.
That's where I'm thinking for some of these other conferences as they're looking at this, and I keep hearing that the SEC is hands down the place that Florida State goes to. But looking at it, the holdup is the grant of rights. So right now, what a grant of rights means is that when Florida State has games televised, the money goes to the ACC. We don't know exactly what's in that contract. The News and Observer down here in Raleigh has tried to get parts of it. I think they were able to get the old version. It was amended in 2017, I believe, or sometime around there. The original one was signed in like 2012, and it's the reason Maryland ended up leaving or whatever. They were like, hey, this isn't good for us. And the rest of the conference was like, I can't believe Maryland left. They're like a longtime member. This is scary. We should all just team up and lock it in. And I'm telling you, I've been saying it all along. ESPN has been forcing basketball for so long that I think they got in the ACC's ears and they were like, listen, you guys are a premier basketball conference. Just lock this up. No big deal. And meanwhile, Fox is on the other side with the Big Ten saying, oh, we only care about the football money. Like, we'll pay you for basketball, but football brings in so much more revenue that you're going to be more valuable than any other conference. And I think finally people are starting to realize that, because even in the Florida State contract, the Big Ten's making $200 million more than the SEC. And that contract is shorter. Now, they haven't added in Texas revenue, but you can't tell me that Oklahoma and Texas are worth $100 million a year each, Matt. They're not. Maybe Texas.
They justified the Longhorn Network.
But that wasn't making that much money. Even Notre Dame's not pushing that much money. They said with the Notre Dame, remember, we brought their numbers in last summer. I think they were like asking for 80, and NBC told them like, no. So if Notre Dame's not worth that, the reason the Big Ten's worth that much is because they're able to guarantee a big-time game every week. They're telling TV networks that, hey, we have 3 television partners. We have 4 or 5 gigantic teams right now. Every weekend you have a chance to get a Michigan, an Ohio State, a Penn State, a USC, a Nebraska, hell, an Iowa, a Michigan State. Like, you can pick one of their games. For the ACC, they're like, hey, TV networks, every football Saturday, you can pick Florida State or Clemson. It's only 2 games. That's why the conference is making less. That's why with the SEC coming in, they don't have 3 networks bidding them up. They only have ESPN. ESPN only has so many time slots they can fill. I just don't think that they're going to say, Florida State, you know what, we're going to add you to the SEC and we're going to pay you more. Because right now, they don't have to do anything. They're not bidding against anyone. They're going to be bidding against themselves. If Florida State leaves, all ESPN's going to do is take the money that was owed to them and give it to the ACC, and then that's only going to hold the ACC over for a little bit. And if Florida State leaves before Clemson, they're going to get the worst deal. If Clemson leaves after, they'll get a little bit of a better deal, and then so on and so forth. The more teams leave, the less it goes down, but that first team's going to end up paying just a ton more. Just like how Maryland had to pay like a ton, and even Rutgers was trying to get into the Big Ten, and it worked out. Everyone laughed about him. But now it's like, yeah, they own like the East Coast, and now the Big Ten's going to go from New York all the way to LA. And it's so much that I don't know where they can go from there, but go ahead.
Because I think when you look at Maryland, at the time that Maryland left the ACC, they weren't winning the ACC in basketball and football and anything. So I think for them to be able to justify maybe lacrosse or field hockey, and then their basketball program was okay at the time, they're going into the Big Ten where they didn't really have as much competition as you would consistently playing your Duke and Wake and then UNC and those teams. It made sense that play a little bit lighter of a basketball schedule. Maybe it helps your seeding for the NCAA tournament. And Maryland never really seemed to capitalize on that.
I was going to bring that up. It was almost like a false promise, like, hey, we really want to get into the DC, New York market. We're thinking of adding you guys and Rutgers. And listen, you've heard all the commentary from ESPN. We're not that good at basketball. Come in and win the conference. Take us, like, be the basketball program now that, like, Indiana's kind of lost it. And they haven't done that. They came in. Their Big Ten tournament record, Matt, 3-7. They won one Big Ten regular title. It was a tie. It wasn't an outright title. I forget. There was a bunch of teams that year, I think. It was like the COVID year, maybe it's 2020. Maybe it was only them in Michigan State. I thought there were more because I thought it was like a weird year, but I think that was the COVID year. Now, there's Wisconsin, too, on here. I don't like how the way this table's set up, but that's my thing, too. It was like, come in, win lacrosse, awesome. That is a sport that the Big Ten normally doesn't win national championships in, I don't think, and now with Maryland, they are. Women's basketball, they helped elevate that, even though they haven't won it yet while they're in the Big Ten. I think they've been like one of the top programs. So it's like they add value. And I don't see they came in and made a ton of extra money. And their alums and stuff were negative against the Big Ten at first. I have to think that they're sitting back and laughing now. Because they're not in jeopardy. Right?
I think the bottom is kind of bottomed out because with the ACC, I think at the time, the way that people were looking at reorgs around the time that Maryland change happened is it was what's going to make the conferences more well-rounded. Not necessarily what's good specifically for football. Football may have been an added bonus, but I think they were looking at can we be strong all around? And so with some of the teams that they were adding, it was geographically, let's spread it out a little bit more, but also let's diversify where we're at. So when they added the initial expansion and brought some of those Big East teams in, it was like, okay, we have some schools that are contributing, like Virginia Tech was going to contribute more during football and give a little bit more balance or competitiveness to the conference. Florida State was still going to be by far the team that was carrying football. Basketball still had Duke and Carolina that were running through. So, you were still having solid runs with men's basketball. Florida State with baseball, you had a lot of space for them to handle that stuff, So it made sense that if you're trying to build all-around conference, they were heading in the right direction. But I think what happened is in worrying about teams leaving, they locked themselves into such a crappy deal for so long that then the Big Ten and the SEC are battling with each other, driving the prices up. Meanwhile, the ACC stuck at the bottom. And when you look, it was something that me and you talked about a couple months ago. The scary thing is let Florida State start getting that extra TV money. They're being competitive on a national stage, being down $30 million to programs, And it's what happens when you actually start having just play money to throw around it, recruiting and facilities and infrastructure and all that other stuff?
That's why I want to see, because the last round, other than Nebraska, the Big Ten added Nebraska because they wanted to balance the divisions. And it didn't work out. And I think that's why they wanted USC to come in. Because everything in the Big Ten is so East focused right now that I wouldn't even be surprised if they take the deal that Oregon and Washington are pushing, where they're begging the Big Ten to get in, and they'll take a ridiculously low cut just to get into the Big Ten this year. Because they know that their TV negotiations are done. The Big Ten played it perfect. They're like, we're going to balance football. Nebraska made one Big Ten championship game and fell off the map. So now they're like, well, they want more Big Ten football games. We don't want to do the top teams making the playoffs or the Big Ten championship game because that's going to hurt us in the playoffs. They know that having a Michigan and Ohio State rematch like this year would have happened or whatever, you're going to eliminate a chance for two teams making the playoffs. So adding in a Western division and keeping divisions, I think, at least I'm hoping that's the direction they're going, because the SEC is talking about getting rid of divisions. And then they're going to really be in the trouble, I think, whenever some of their teams start to eliminate or hurt some of their other lower teams. Because, like, it only takes a few years of you losing in the playoffs. Look at the basketball tournament. Like, the Big Ten, like, you lose a bunch of years, only Michigan and Michigan State advance. They're not going to take you serious. Right? Now the Big 12 is ranked way ahead of the Big Ten this year. I think the same thing would happen in football. The SEC gets a couple of losses early. They're not going to get that many teams the next year, and then they're going to have their top two teams eliminating each other. Where if you have the division, you always have that benefit of the doubt, where it's like, look, we couldn't put the loser of Ohio State, Michigan in our championship game. That doesn't make sense. But we do think they should make the playoffs. And that's where I think if they're trying to do the divisions right, I keep seeing people say the Big Ten should add Florida State and add Notre Dame and put them in a division with Penn State. And I say, wait, why? Why would you do that? You're solving the problem by adding Florida State. If the Big Ten adds Florida State, you're able to put Florida State and Penn State together, and that's your power couple in that division. You have Michigan and Ohio State in the other one. Then you put Notre Dame and Michigan State or Wisconsin, like whoever you think is the power in that other division, put them in that one. And then you have the West one be USC and Oregon or USC and Washington, whatever teams you think are the best out there. Because right now I'm hearing that the Big Ten's looking to add 4 teams. If they add 4 teams all in the West from the Pac, it doesn't make sense, Matt, because that means they're going to 20 teams. How are they going to do divisions? You're going to have one team that's left out. The TV networks like the 9-game schedule. That's what the hang-up right now is with the SEC. ESPN sees that Fox and them are paying the Big Ten for 9 games. SEC still wants like the 8-game schedule or whatever. They're looking at a 1-7 or maybe a 3-6, like the Big Ten. And with the 9-game schedule, you can do many regional divisions like the Big Ten. You can have 5 teams in each division. You play the other 4 teams. That's 4 games plus 5 another division. You get 9. If they're able to sneak Oregon and Washington in, I would personally want them to call up Florida State and Notre Dame. I think Florida State would kind of be on an island for right now. But if they can work out their grant of rights, it's going to pay dividends for them in the long term. And they can look and say, like, look at the NFL. Like, for a while, like, they didn't have that many teams in the South. And if Notre Dame says no, which I have a feeling they might still say no, bring Georgia Tech. And a lot of people are going to say, why not Clemson? Like you said at the beginning of the show, Clemson's a flash in the pan. Georgia Tech is right in the heart of SEC territory. They're in Atlanta. They won a national championship in the 90s. They had one more recently than Georgia up until like their last run, right? Of back-to-backs.
Yeah.
If you're going to take a gamble on Miami and their issues, why not just take Georgia Tech and then tell Florida State, like, that's your partner. You're going to be in a division with Penn State, Rutgers, and Maryland. I don't see how Florida State would not be pumped about that, and I think Penn State would be the same thing. Because Penn State's going to look at it and say, oh, shit, you're telling me we don't have to beat Ohio State and Michigan again? We just have to beat Florida State? I will take it. Right?
Yeah, and I think with living in Pennsylvania, that would be a great matchup. And you still have the old ACC connection with Maryland. That I like your point of bringing Georgia Tech, and I think that makes sense from an academic standpoint as well. That the Big Ten's looking at. I would, as much as I enjoy watching Miami lose, I would hate to go to a separate conference and then you're losing out on that Miami rivalry, because I think it's a travesty that Pitt no longer plays West Virginia and no longer plays Penn State consistently. And I feel like those are in-state games that you should still be playing. And like, regardless of some of the other non-conference games, Florida State's always played Miami. They've always played Florida. That I look at, there's programs that would rather play FCS teams in their non-conference, but here you have Miami and Florida that has been competitive at different points, and if you don't win those games, you're not playing for a serious bowl. You're getting the potluck bowl.
And that's where I agree with you. And the reasoning of me taking Georgia Tech first, I think Miami and Clemson would still be there. I think there's a real danger for the Big Ten whenever they're looking at stuff. If they say, because the reason the SEC is trying to push for Florida State, the rumors are, they want to keep the Big Ten out of that corridor. And if they lock up a Georgia Tech and a Florida State, I think those are more impactful than, say, grabbing Miami, which isn't a state name, and grabbing, Clemson? Same reason. Like Clemson and Florida State, or Clemson and Miami are like more of like the smaller, they're named after cities or whatever. I think that they're going to be there. I know that they drive in viewers right now for football, but like all around sports, that's not it. And let's be honest, if you're putting Clemson up against Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, USC, they lose in ratings every time. Every time. So you don't need a top dog. They were top dog in the ACC, and yeah, I hear people say like, oh, someone might tune in to watch Wisconsin and Clemson. Like, yeah, they might. They also already tune in to watch Wisconsin play Iowa and stuff on ESPN too. So like, we really don't need that in the Big Ten. We need states that are in the South that can help with recruiting. And I think if the Big Ten were smart, it would nab Georgia and it would nab Florida. And it would try to get a team in Texas. I would call up Texas A&M. I've been saying that a long time. And see what they want to do after being snubbed and have Texas join the SEC. Because like I said, the thing that you don't want to have happen, and I'm saying this to you as a Florida State fan, the Big Ten already makes more money than the SEC. ESPN said that they're cutting contracts. They're not going to be throwing the money around. I would be surprised if their contract beats the Big Ten contract. The Big Ten also has another renewal. So if the SEC can't beat it now and the Big Ten jumps even further ahead in 7 years, who's to say instead of Florida State getting the pull from the Big Ten, they just don't grab the Gators? Gators are already AAU. And if the Big Ten says like, hey, you know what? We're just going to take some teams from the SEC that feel like that they're not competing because they're like behind Alabama every year and LSU and stuff. Like, hey, Florida, you want to come up here? You'll be the top dog in the East. Same thing we pitched the Florida State, and you're going to make more money. And I think that that's the crack, because as long as there's more money in another conference, teams are going to be looking around. And I don't agree with all the other pundits saying, well, there's going to be four conferences. Like, there's not going to be a cut and dry conference. I think it's going to be one major conference. And it's whatever conference makes the most money. Right now, the Big Ten already has all the major markets. I don't see them losing the money battle with the SEC. I just don't. They can lose as many championships as they want. That's only one game a year. You expand the playoffs, and I guarantee it's going to be just like basketball, where you have the top dogs, Michigan, Ohio State, rolling in the rankings, Matt. Their highest rated game every year. So, like, if the ratings are coming in the playoffs and it's all Big Ten teams, guess who's going to be paid more? They don't care if they lose the one championship game. That's a separate bid. Like, they would rather have Notre Dame go undefeated, get crushed in the playoffs, and then go undefeated the next year. They don't care that they didn't win the Natty because they went undefeated on their network.
But I think that's the argument that Notre Dame consistently uses to say, nah, we're going to stay independent, because they can pick and choose a lot of those matchups to make sure they're advantageously in a position to be in the mix.
But like I said, they're already taking a hit.
They're going to bring the money. They're going to bring fans. They're going to generate revenue coming to town. So ESPN and Fox are going to be welcoming them with open arms.
Well, that's the thing. They're going to be, at some point, they're going to lose their edge, and they don't want to be behind $40 million a year, right? We don't know what the final television deal is going to be, with USC and all them compared to what Notre Dame's going to be. But let's be honest, NBC just bought Big Ten rights. They're not going to pay Notre Dame more when they already got a better schedule. Now they don't have to put on Notre Dame versus Navy, right? They can put that on Peacock, and that's one of their better games. What about when Notre Dame loses to Marshall? Right? How many people are watching that?
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, instead, guess what you get? Oh, a powerful Michigan State versus USC matchup, which is a random September matchup now. And they're like, yeah, that is better than Marshall at Notre Dame. Awesome. We'll show this instead. Thanks, Big Ten. Because that's the kind of matchups you're going to get now. It might not be tier 1 every week, but you're going to have a better tier 2 schedule that having one team focus just doesn't get. That's why the ESPN went with getting rid of the Longhorn Network. Texas can't play 12 great teams every week. But if you have the entire conference locked up, you can show a great game every week. At least one, right? Or bring in one of your heavy hitters. That's why I think teams that are looking around, you don't want to be, because I'm feeling bad for like NC State, because they're looking around right now, and if they do something dumb like jump to the Big 12, where do you go up from there? Like, I would almost, I don't even know what to recommend some of these schools, but if teams start to abandon ship and the other TV networks, because, like, let's be honest, the other TV networks do want 4 conferences, and they're going to pretend that those 4 conferences are equal because they can't show Big Ten every week and SEC every week. So ABC and ESPN have the SEC locked up. The rest of the networks have the Big Ten. But you better believe they're going to mix in some other conferences. It's kind of like what they do now with Big East basketball, right? Fox shows the Big Ten or whatever, and then they show the Big East. They don't even have football. But they have ranked basketball teams they can randomly show. Heck, even CBS over the past weekend showed Michigan, Wisconsin, and then followed it up with UCLA and Colorado. UCLA is a Big Ten team now. So now you can do doubleheaders in basketball and have blue bloods all day. Just in the Big Ten. You don't even have to leave the net or the conference. You're like, okay, perfect. And then Amazon was trying to get the Pac-12 after dark. What if they just... Oh, now my thing's kicking in. But now what happens if the Oregon and Washington just bring that to the Big Ten? And they're just like, hey, what if we bring an extra TV deal to your TV deal to offset our costs? Do the other teams make more then? I don't know. It's insane. I did have one other thing written down here, and I oppose this to you. So the way the grant of rights work that I understand, it's home games, right?
I believe.
So Florida State right now, they're talking about like how if Florida State leaves, they're not going to get TV broadcasts from their games, which would be their home games. Because if they play a neutral site game, that might be a little bit different, and maybe not. But because I haven't seen it, it's not really public on what they can and can't do. But of course, if they're playing away games, if they play in a game at Michigan's Big House, that's going to draw big ratings, right? I have a hard time believing that ESPN's going to just be like the tax man sitting there collecting it. Like in the old like Disney Robin Hood where that bear guy just goes around and takes all the money. Like ESPN's not going to be on the bus saying, hey, great game out there, Florida State, we'll take that check now. Because it wasn't their game. The grant of rights gives ESPN the rights to show the games that Florida State hosts, right? So if they really wanted to leave the conference, couldn't they just schedule 12 away games?
I mean, I think they could. I think the avenue that Florida State, they're playing a scary game of chicken here. But the way that the conference was written is they were trying to set it up so the one school, like basically that a Florida State couldn't leave, and then the rest of the conference would be left out in the dark. So the way they wanted it set up was that if multiple schools had the opportunity to leave. So if for whatever reason the SEC poached 3 or 4 teams and the Big Ten poached 3 or 4, that it would trigger enough that it would dissolve the conference, and then you wouldn't have to worry about, because they would no longer be a conference. But they wanted to break up. I don't want just like it's almost like when Maryland jumped ship. They're like, well, we need to tighten this up so that nobody else single-handedly bails on us, because it wasn't like they left and then we were bringing powerhouses in to replace them. So I think that was kind of that thinking at the time, to try to keep the conference together. And maybe they learned lessons from when the Big East split up, because when Miami and Virginia Tech came into the ACC, it kind of put the Big East in a spot where they had to just kind of specialize basketball schools only, you know? I don't know.
And I look at the Big 12 too, because they went through the same thing. And what did Texas and Oklahoma pay, like $100 million? And they left like a year early, 2 years early, I think. I don't remember. But that was a big thing where they were talking about, like, well, they're going to have to pay the other schools. And that was with the Big 12 adding extra schools and immediately letting them vote so that they couldn't, like, dissolve the conference or whatever. So that's another route. But like I said, if the ACC tries to do something like that, I'm just very skeptical that the other teams aren't going to be like, yeah, we have one foot out the door. Because if it does become 2 power conferences right now and all the money starts going to them, and ESPN comes back and says, like, hey, if you don't let Florida State go, we're just not paying at your next contract. We want them in the SEC, which could be a thing, because they don't want to lose them. Because remember, if ESPN owns the rights right now, if Florida State, like I said, if they went to the Big Ten and they said, hey, we're willing to play 10 away games a year or whatever it is, 9 away games a year, and then just have the money go to the Big Ten and you guys can reimburse us later as like some type of power move, ESPN would then not have Florida State at all. So like, would they be willing to just bite the bullet and pay more not to lose them? I don't know.
Well,
if it was Alabama, of course they would, right? They wouldn't want Alabama to leave, but do they think they have enough with Florida and Georgia to play chicken?
I think they have enough with Georgia right now. I think the chicken more right now is Alabama, because, you know, Saban only has so many. He's on borrowed time as a college coach. I mean, with his age becoming a factor, at some point I'm assuming he's going to want to step away, or he's going to have to. Like, it's not that he's going to maintain forever. I don't know that, like, we've seen this game played before where a coach has a lot of success, leaves, and the assistants, they may have enough of a core tradition to keep the program going for a little bit, but it's tough to maintain a high level of winning, especially the way that Alabama has won recently. I think you're seeing some cracks in the way that the NIL and the transfer portal are being used, that the methods that Alabama was recruiting with and just bringing in like 30, 40 guys and then cutting away ones that they didn't need, or, you know, funneling guys out. Like, it was documented. They were doing like some kind of, like, not illegal, but just like kind of shitty things to make sure that they had the numbers and the kids that they wanted. And if you're a top recruit, like, you want to be there. You want to be coached by Saban. So he was able to make that work. But I think with the way recruiting and stuff goes now, the players have a little bit more control, and you're not seeing Alabama just absolutely throttle everyone by 70, 80 points.
That's why I think, as much as like the SEC's been dominating, the expanded playoff is something that they definitely were against, and for good reason. The SEC didn't want to lose that pool where they're able to say, like, look, we've had LSU, Alabama, Georgia all win titles. We're a multi-title conference. Like, we don't need extra bids. And now, with an expanded playoff, I think you're going to see that with the NIL and other conferences making more money than they are. like it has to be tough to be like an Oklahoma, even though you're joining the SEC and you're making more money now, to look down up and see Rutgers making more money than you. Right?
Which, like, that's a double-edged sword too, because Rutgers is making more money, but what are they really doing with it? They're not turning it into like a powerhouse in anything. So they're just kind of like riding the wave. So,
yeah, but like I said, all they're doing is collecting that money, right? And other schools, all they see is the money. They don't care. Like if Rutgers starts winning in like some sport and they're winning titles, they will flock to that, and that will be their thing. Much like Maryland with like lacrosse and stuff. Yeah, they'd like to compete in football. They win a few games, go to a bowl. If bowls go away, it might be different, you know. But as of right now, I think they look at it and they're just going to say like, "Hey, here we are. That's the conference." Like I don't know what else they can do. You need body bag teams. You just do. You can't always win. No one's going to watch a 6-6 Auburn team, right? They'll watch a 12-0 Auburn team or 11-0 take on a 11-0 Bama, but they're not going to care if it's like a 5-7 Auburn. And they're like, well, they played a really tough schedule this year. Their crossover teams are LSU and Alabama and Georgia. People aren't going to care about that, right? They'll say, well, why would I watch this if I can watch some other random game that has two teams that have winning records, you know?
I don't know. The NFL seems to make it work where they're putting on like the Jets and Bears that are like 1-10.
Yeah, but those games are what? Those are the Thursday night games now, right? That's where you need the Pac-12 after dark, Matt. College football doesn't have I guess they do have a Thursday, but could you imagine though, like in 10 years, if the MAC action or whatever they call it goes away? That used to be Big East night, remember? Thursday night.
Yeah.
Now that might be Rutgers night. And maybe that's what they need. They're like, hey.
Wonder, like, with the way that, with is this a move and a shift by the Big Ten and the SEC in a somewhat joint method to be able to almost break the NCAA up, because they can treat it like almost like the AFL NFL merger, where you have these two bigger programs that have all this, the bulk of the resources. You know, you expand any more, I mean, you're going to almost absorb the majority of the Power 5 teams.
Well, this is the one thing that's crazy. So right now, Central Florida, University of Central Florida, is by far the biggest university in Florida. So the Big Ten could ignore everything that I say, and they could say, let the SEC become more regionalized. Let us just lock up UNC, Oregon, and some of these other more national brands, you know, that might not be the best at football, and let them take Clemson and other teams that are purely football, not win 10 games anymore. They go like we'll start winning 8 games and people forget about them. And then they're like, okay, they're gone. And then the Big Ten's like, we'll just take UCF because their enrollment's massive. After the Big 12, you know, hypes them up, right? They won their natty in 2017 for the first time. How do you know they're not the next Miami? Public school, big research, you know. South Florida's another one too. South Florida's like 4th in enrollment, right? Ahead of Florida State, right? So the Big Ten could add Central and South Florida and say, oh, we're going to just go with that in 10 years. And I don't even know if people would bat an eye, right? They're like, well, they're making all the moves, and they're like, well, we need some more Eastern Conference like side of things. Let's go ahead and just Penn State, you better step up. Now's your chance. No more excuses, you know. No more, well, we always have to play Ohio State or Michigan on the road. That's what I hear from their fans. Well, at least we got Michigan at home, but we know we still have to go on the road to Ohio State. It's unfair. I'm like, we play the same schedule, guys. What are you talking about? But that's what I'm wondering. Like, what is the Big Ten move? Do they even have to add? If they lock up the entire conference, by going nationwide and get Notre Dame, I'll be honest, Notre Dame's a way better catch than Florida State anyway. So if you get Notre Dame and you keep the SEC kind of in the South, eventually cracks are going to form there. Because it's going to be so regionalized that you're alienating, over half the country?
Well, that's essentially what the Big East did, because they were all up in that northeast corridor.
Yeah. And then they tried to expand with football, but then I think if the other teams would have just started playing football, maybe we wouldn't have had this mess. Right?
Potentially.
Because then you would have just had 8 or so conferences that were all big, and then we just had those 8 conferences playing an 18 playoff. It would have been much smoother, you know? I mean, if I'm the SEC right now, I don't even know, like, if someone comes and says, hey, ESPN said that we can add Clemson and Florida State right now, but each school has to take $10 million less, do they take that? Like, well, what incentive does Missouri have? Like, they're going to say, like, if we take a loss taking these teams, the Big Ten's going to take a loss. And so what, then the ACC just does uneven revenue sharing for the next 10 years? And maybe Florida State can compete? I don't know. Because if they end up getting stuck there, or do you think there's a chance they would join the Big 12?
I don't foresee them going that route, because if you're looking at the Big 12, what's better at the Big 12 that you have rivals there in the ACC and you've built the ACC. I think the better move is to stay at home. But if the right opportunity comes along, and maybe the SEC comes knocking, and Florida State is able to, they renegotiate and say, if you join the SEC, we'll waive some of that because you're still under that ACC umbrella, and maybe that's enough to flip the script. But I don't know that the Big Ten would. You brought up earlier about the negotiations for the network deals. So the SEC negotiates their deal, and even if it's a little bit above what the Big Ten is now, why would the Big Ten try to blow that number out of the water even more? Like that'd almost be like the NBA trying to compete against themselves. If the SEC jumps them by, say, 100 million, why would the Big Ten go, oh yeah, we're gonna go to 300 million and jump even higher than them? That don't make sense, and they don't have to.
Well, see, that's the one thing here. The latest projection is that going through 2024, when Texas and Oklahoma join, that the SEC is making $57.6 million, and they project them to be worth up to $96 million. Like, there's no way they're just going to jump $40 million more. They've already said that that's not going to happen. So people are looking at these old numbers and they're saying, like, okay, that's not going to happen. In the meantime, the Big Ten's going to be in the 80 millions. So if the Big Ten's making 86 or whatever theirs is going to be, which is already locked in, and the SEC is still sitting at 57, or like let's say they get up to 70, which is what's rumored, you're still 10 million behind per team, right? And so if Florida State and Clemson, then they're like, yeah, right now we got you locked in for 39 million at the ACC. We're not going to pay you that much more. Plus, you guys leaving makes the rest of the ACC drop. So we're going to have to then pay overpay for each of those schools. So we're paying not only Florida State $40 million more, and Clemson $40 million more. Now we're paying 14 other schools $10 million more than what they're worth, or 15 million, whatever Florida State's number said it was, So like that's a lot of people that are overpaying for no reason, just to get them to move closer to what the SEC prediction is. And I would like to see the numbers come out for real, because they throw these numbers up and they're like, well, ESPN has deals and they're going to be jumping up. It's like, how are you estimating that they're going to grow $20 million? Like, oh, we're adjusting it based on playoffs, but it's like the Big Ten number doesn't include playoffs. So why are you including that in the SEC number? Because the Big Ten number is going to go up too. You don't think the Big Ten's going to have multiple teams in the playoffs? You're insane. They already did last year. Now with USC, they're going to have probably 4 teams in every year, probably. I would be like, there might be some down years for the Big Ten, but I would say you're probably going to have the most teams every year from the Big Ten and the SEC. And that's the other factor that Florida State has to weigh. If they lose to Clemson, ACC might be a one big league. So they might not ever make it. If you lose to Penn State or whatever, lose to Michigan, Ohio State, you still might make it in the Big Ten. Or the SEC, same thing. Yeah, you lost to Bama and Georgia, but you beat LSU, you're in, right? I just don't know. I don't understand why the SEC would get that bump whenever the numbers are already out and their deal is worth way less than the Big Ten's, and it's for a longer term. So that's the one thing, because even the newspaper down here said that like the Big Ten had like record revenue, and so the SEC signed like a 10-year deal for $3 billion or whatever, and the Big Ten crushed it last year. So the SEC hasn't signed anything new. So, and they also have another deal in 2027, I think, the Big Ten. I just have a hard time believing that it's not going to get even wider every year, the Big Ten, right? The only year the SEC jumped over the Big Ten recently was COVID, and that's because the Big Ten started late. Otherwise, the Big Ten would have had more revenue since like 2016, Matt. I don't see how the SEC jumps over them.
It makes sense, and I'm biased because I want to see the move and just have access to that bigger pool of money, because I think they're competing right now being 30 mil a year behind everyone else.
Well, that's what I was wondering about the Big 12. So right now the ACC is pulling in, for this year it would be coming up. The Big Ten's going to be at like 59. The SEC is going to be at 56. And then I think the Big Ten's kicks in next year where they jump to 73 or whatever. The Big 12's at 42. The ACC's at 36. So if you jump to the Big 12, you're still making $8 million more or whatever. It might not be as high as the SEC, but now you're only $10 million behind them instead of 20, you know? So, like, is it worth it to kind of try to jump that number up? Maybe, but then again, is the Big 12 going to even have Fox bidding high enough now that they already won the Big 10 bid? Right? Do they want more games on their network? I don't know. They seem to do good in the NFL with only 2 games on, right?
Yeah, and for the most part, I mean, there are obviously weeks that they're not nationally televised, but when Florida State was in their prime in the Bowden years, I could always find their game on TV. There was always, like, even on the local channels, there was always access to them. And I think that just goes with, if you're winning, it's going to take care of itself. And that helps when you're having that maintained success. And I think we're in a position right now that if we can capitalize on the recruiting class and the portal stuff that we have, if you win, a lot of this takes care of itself, because I think to get a push into the playoffs, and then you're going to get that notoriety, and you start bringing recruits in, that it creates that spiral that you see happening with Georgia. You know, they were the team that was, they're a step or two away, and then Kirby Smart came in, and now magically they put those pieces together, won the first championship, and now they just mowed people down in year 2. It's like they have that continuity. But I think if Florida State can just keep winning, the other conferences, the other stuff's going to take care of itself. But you have to maintain that winning standard. You can't be a 500 program and think you're going to cover that 30, 40, $50 million gap.
And I'm looking through the numbers here, trying to find the latest one. And like I said, the Big Ten one, it's looking like the SEC's bringing in an average of like 300 to 500 million per year from ESPN. The Big Ten's bringing in 1.14 billion per year. It's like double, right? So I don't even see how the other projections of them only being 10 million behind is going to be accurate. How much more can the playoffs make up, especially if the Big Ten's getting multiple teams in too? I just really don't see it. I think a lot of that might just be ESPN trying to save their ass because they don't want to bid next time for the SEC. And maybe it does, because right now it's only 300 million. The 500 estimate is based on what Texas and Oklahoma would bring them. That's still half of what the Big Ten's getting. So it looks like the LA move was the move, right? Because people are looking at some of these older projections. The Big Ten was supposed to make way less because they didn't know they were going to bring in the second biggest market in the United States, right? So, like, if you're Florida State and you have a pick, why wouldn't you just go and say, hey, we're going to give you one of the biggest states in America, and then we're going to be your top dog? Like, we're going to compete, and we're 12-team playoff, we're in it every year. There's no way with this extra money that we're not going to be top 10 every year. Right? Go back to the 90s. Why not? I really don't see, like, it boggles my mind, and I'm not saying that Florida State won't go to the SEC, but I see a lot of SEC homers that don't look at the numbers here, and they just keep repeating that the SEC is the best. Florida State, of course, wants to compete there. But why wouldn't you take an easier schedule and more money? And then, like you said with Georgia, you're paying, even Tennessee right now, did you see that they got infractions against them for paying recruits with their old coach Pruitt?
Yeah.
So, like, they're paying, and it finally paid off for them now, after how many years? Why would you join that and already be behind established programs that are paying, like Bama, Georgia, Tennessee now? Hell, A&M's been paying out the ass. It hasn't worked out. I'm like surprised. Like, why not take the built-in guaranteed TV money right now and say, we're going to get you in recruiting in Florida? That's what that should be their entire pitch. Hey guys, you need recruits in Florida? We got our other buddies over here in Georgia Tech. You want 2 recruiting hotbeds in your conference now? Call us up. We're ready. We are ready, Matt. And then we're going to win, too. Put us in a pod with Penn State. We'll love it. Rutgers, Maryland. We don't care. Like, I'm sure a Penn State, you might lose the Miami game for now, like I said, but the only other thing, you might lose the Florida game. I think you keep one of them. If Florida says, like, no, screw you guys, you join the Big Ten, I think you can keep the Miami rivalry going. I think Miami might join the Big 10 or Big 12. Because if Florida State leaves, they were kind of following on the coattails. Why not just join the Big 12?
That might be good for them anyhow.
That might be the best move for them. Then their rivalry becomes with UCF, a team that they can beat money-wise right now. And then they can get back to their glory of just beating them up and making the playoffs and maybe making a run. Or stay in the ACC and see what happens. Like, I highly doubt that if the Big Ten says, hey, we're adding Oregon and Washington and Notre Dame and Florida State or something, that the SEC counters with, hey, we're going to add Clemson and Virginia Tech and NC State. I think most people would be scratching their heads, right? And Miami, right? We got him. We got Miami. People will be like, okay, all right. Because I really don't know where the SEC has to go.
But that's almost like a Pirates move, where you're like, hey, we brought Cuts back. Like, oh, you're brought back when he's 50 years old.
Yeah, well, that is kind of, that's what.
We got Miami. Well, they were good 25 years ago.
Well, see, getting Missouri was like they backed into Missouri, and that ended up being good for their TV deal, because that was like back in the media market days where they got into the Midwest with the SEC network, where now it's like, what teams are you bringing in to get into Big Ten country? Cincinnati? Like, they keep talking about like how they're going to pull Ohio State. I have a hard time believing that a guy in the Ohio State meeting is going to say, well, we could play in a conference with Alabama and make $500 million less as a conference. And they're like, let's think on it. Because I think that gives the Big Ten flexibility here. Yeah, they're making how much more? They can add a couple of teams and still make more per team than the SEC. And maybe it gets them the strategic strongholds for like an Apple streaming or an Amazon streaming or whatever. I think that's what they have to do. What's going to be the next big thing? It's just... And in the SEC network, the bad thing with that, half their games are going to be on cable. The Big Ten's going to have games on 3 different public networks like the NFL. It's almost like the NFL versus the XFL TV deal, right? Because I have the XFL on here for our last topic. Their TV ratings fell in half, and I saw so many hit articles against them. But it's really pertinent to what we're talking about. The XFL, I predicted it was going to fall because they went off free over the air, which is on almost everywhere. They count bars. Not every bar shows FX, right? So you put some games on FX, of course your ratings are going to drop. I was surprised that they still had averaged over 500,000 viewers, right?
Yeah.
They haven't promoted the league at all. Like, I still don't see ads for it. I texted you because I was watching the game on Thursday. I didn't even know it was on. I was like, hey, you know what? I want to check in on Michigan basketball, making a push here for the tournament. I think they have a chance to get in. And I'm like watching Michigan, and on the meantime, XFL's on. And I'm like, I guess I'll watch some XFL too. And some of the stuff that they did was pretty good. With like trying to run the clock more and stuff. And I almost wonder, like, if you're going to do that, you need to promote it a bit more because you're doing all these rule changes that I notice because I'm a diehard football fan, right? A casual guy watching the game is just going to be like, well, this is weird. Something's off, but I don't know what it is, right? I don't go on a podcast every week and bitch about the refs. So I don't know. I don't know what's the deal, right? So when I look at things like that, it's almost like, hey, you're taking the next step to be the league, but work with the NFL. Like, why are you just instituting a bunch of rule changes without, like, asking them? Because, like, even college right now is looking at shortening the game, and they talked about running the clock after a pass, right? Could be a great deal. I think, why stop the clock at all, like the NFL? How about you just stopping the clock to move the chains? Unless it's 2 minutes, right? That's the easiest solution of all. Make it more like the NFL and then you're good.
But I think part of the argument was that by shortening the game, that there was a higher risk of player injury. And I don't know if there's going to be fruit to that or not, but that was one of the things that was being made.
No, the running clock thing was they wanted to shorten the amount of plays. And they said if you run the clock, you run way less plays. And they said, well, then the players don't get breaks because they don't want to shorten it too much, Matt. Because there goes some of that ad revenue, right? So they're like, whoa, hold on, guys. That's way too much. We only need to cut off 7 minutes. Like that's a big deal in time of things, right? People browse their phones more than 7 minutes at a time on Facebook or whatever. So they're just trying to keep it going so that people don't get bored and that they don't notice that they're being shown so many ads, right? If they go to the NFL running clock, then the games are shorter, you can fit more in, but they don't have as much inventory. And until you get these major conferences in place, I don't think that they're going to go that route. I almost wonder if, with the new Fox deal and stuff, if they don't start pushing for something too, right? Because if they own 3 marquee games on Saturday, they might not care about stretching the one big noon game 5 hours, it seems like, every Saturday. Like, hey, here's our weekly Michigan game. Get ready for 18 ads in between every touchdown. So you're sitting there and you're like, the players have to be getting cold, right? And so I think that was some of their BS to get more commercials squeezed in, where they were like, we really need to give them breaks between plays because they're not going to get hurt, when they really should be shortening the game. Because I'm sure they have the numbers. Did injuries go up? It feels like more primetime guys got hurt this year, but maybe that's just me.
I don't know. That's what I thought, but that was one of the arguments that I saw for why they were they were hesitant to cut, because they were worried about players potentially getting injured. But I mean, I don't know. I have the issue that I have more is that I feel like the deal that they attempted to negotiate, they didn't really take advantage of decent time slots. Like the NFL could play a game at 10 o'clock at night, and you're going to draw people in to follow. For a new league that's just, drafted players on a random Thursday, it's tough to say, oh yeah, watch this West Coast game that's on later in the evening.
And that's where I think like the TV networks make a big deal. And same with like the media markets, right? I found a listing here going back to like the college thing. The Big Ten is in number 1 New York, number 2 LA, number 3 Chicago. Depending on what they do, number 6 Bay Area is right there if they grab Stanford or something. They also have DC 8 with Maryland that we talked about, Detroit 11, and Minnesota Twin Cities 15. Right? The SEC was in Atlanta 9, Houston 10, Tampa 14, Orlando 18, St. Louis 21. Like none of the big markets. If you count Dallas-Fort Worth, for maybe Texas and Oklahoma, that's 5. That might be their new highest. But there's really nowhere they can grow because the ACC even doesn't have anywhere to go. If they have Boston for Boston College, that's not really a thing. And Miami is 16, that's not really a thing either. So where are they adding teams that are going to add more markets? You could say Houston, maybe they got it with A&M, but I already counted that for them. So it's like, do they have Austin? Austin's 40th. So they're just trying to do brand power. But like same with the XFL and like even the USFL to an extent, when you put the teams in the markets, a lot of it just doesn't make sense to me. Like the XFL, you have them all around the country. Awesome. But you already had major market rivalries right there. You could have just did New York, DC, like Baltimore and like things like that and just had rivals that were close so people could go to the games. That's why you're spreading them out and you're trying to tell me like, hey, watch the Pittsburgh team. They're going to play a team from Seattle. It's like, okay, I don't care. Do I care if the Steelers play Seattle Seahawks? Not really, right? But if they're playing Baltimore or Cleveland, you better watch out, buddy. That's where I think, like, there has to be a mix. You have to have the rivalries. And the XFL, without marketing, you don't have the rivalries. You just don't. And then having, like, new players every year and new coaches, I think, also hurts. Because they had to take the time off, right? So there wasn't a year last year. And having just the games on cable also hurts. I think that's the ace in the hole for the Big Ten. And what the XFL really should have pushed for. I saw people joking that the Pac-12 had interest from the CW. Why wouldn't the XFL go on the CW? Right? It's a free over-the-air channel that anyone gets. Would people might be watching it? Maybe. Maybe not. But I'm guaranteeing if they're searching through their channels and they're able to get on the CW and maybe get a streaming deal with Apple or someone, it might be better than having your league just be hidden by ESPN for the 12th time. That's my final thought, like for the XFL. As we talk about ratings and bringing in revenue, you got to do something to get me to watch. Like, what's the point of me watching a game? Like, yeah, is the game going to be close? Maybe. A lot of them aren't close. So how are you hooking me in? What's making me want to watch, Matt? And I honestly don't know. Do you have anything you want to add for the XFL? Did you watch any of the games and stuff?
Yeah, I've been trying to watch, and I think, as you're trying to draw people in, I think it's tough. I think you brought up with some of the scores that you have people that are kind of lopsided, and the Vegas game was a rainstorm, so it was a low-scoring affair, and I just think it's going to be tough. It's interesting to see how it plays out, because I think because of how much we're watching, it's easy to say, well, they should make this move or do this thing. But I honestly want to see how the full season plays out for the XFL, because I feel like we got ripped. I think it was heading in a good direction in 20 before everything got shut down, but you never really got the full chance to see the season play out. And then comparing that to what the season 2 of the USFL look like. I mean, I feel like they've made some slight changes. They marketed during the Super Bowl. They put the ad stuff out. Maybe the product's going to be improved with another year under their belt. I don't know.
And I think people still have a negative XFL connotation from the WWF and stuff, WWE, whatever they call themselves now. But like looking at the games last week, you had one close game, which was the Thursday night game I watched, Seattle and St. Louis, right? It was 20-18. Other than that, every other game was double digits. Or I guess close to. Because DC beat Vegas, like you said, it was 18-6. DC's my squad, undefeated still. Then San Antonio won 30-12 over Orlando, a blowout. And then Houston beat Arlington 23-14, which is like 9. But they're all basically 2-score games. And I try to compare it to like college. If I'm watching like Indiana play Purdue and the score's 30-12, I'm really not caring, right? So how do you get me to care? Like you have to have, and I know having a small base like this, but when I brought up the media markets, like why have a team in Arlington? Is it to have a team close to Houston? Get one in Dallas. People like Dallas, the Cowboys, whatever, there's an NFL team in Houston, like try to bring it. Why have another one in San Antonio? Right? You have one in Orlando, give them a rival in Tampa Bay or something. Miami, somewhere in Florida. You have Vegas randomly in St. Louis, they're nowhere close. I mean, I guess you could have Vegas near Seattle, but then there's another one near DC. Is Orlando supposed to be DC's rival? So, like, as I'm watching the games and I'm trying to think of, like, if I'm cheering for DC, who am I supposed to not like? I really don't care, like, about any of these teams. Right? Don't you feel the same way?
Maybe that's the mindset, is that you just want them to lose. Because I still like the Roughneck. And it's like, I want them to win every game.
Well, see, to me, it's like I'll watch DC, but I don't have a hatred for another team that I'm not going to watch, you know? In the NFL, it's like, hey, I watched the Packers play, I watched Tom Brady play or whatever because I like the player. Maybe I'll watch this Bears game to see if they lose. That'll be funny. Or the Vikings because it directly impacts like the Packers, you know? Can't get in the playoffs if so-and-so wins. Same with the Steelers. Like, I'll watch a Ravens game to laugh at them for losing. Like Harbaugh gonna Harbaugh, right? So I don't know what I'm supposed to do for this DC. Like, there's no other team anywhere close to DC. A drive from DC to Orlando has to be, 13 hours at minimum? I don't even know how long that would be, right? I'm guessing. Maybe 12?
That's fair.
Like, that's not a day trip you just take and go to the game. You can't drive to the game and drive home. And I think that's what's missing from the XFL. If I was a diehard fan, I would have picked 2 cities that were closer. Hell, like I always say, like put a team in Raleigh and one in Charlotte because they talked about that one NFL clip that kind of went viral where they talked about putting the team in Charlotte because it's closer to like Clemson and UNC. It's like in between them, other big-time college programs. And it's like, okay, that kind of makes sense, but like you could just put them where all the colleges are, like other cities, right? No one's saying like, well, there's too many people in New York, so we kind of want to put it between New York and Buffalo. Let's just pick a city, like, you know? And I know Charlotte's a bigger city, so it makes sense. Just say that. Yeah, Charlotte's a bigger city. We're putting them there. Perfect. You don't have to pretend that you're like trying to zero in between local colleges, you know? So that's what I want with the XFL. It's like, why'd you pick these team locations? Why'd you pick... Arlington's the one that gets me. It's like, no other team is in Arlington. Why is there a team there? Is that where the Rangers are? I think it might be. But it's like no football team's been there.
Yes, it is.
So I don't know. That's my final thing. I don't have anything for the final bell, do you?
The other thing for final bell is just seeing how the Commanders are going to play out, because they're speculating right now that they're trying to sell their team. They're potentially in the running to try to sign Lamar Jackson. They said at the end of the season they're committed to Sam Howell as QB1 going forward. Like,
They cut Wentz.
if there's ever a franchise, they cut Wentz today. So, like, it's just this gigantic spiral of stink that it's like, what is going to be next for this? How is this program going to go from being like a prominent Super Bowl winning team in the 80s to just absolute hot garbage? And who's going to be willing to buy it and try to change that? I don't know.
And they're in a good market, like I said. Like, they're there. I think that's the one division in the NFL that doesn't totally make sense with having Dallas in it, you know? Because it's hard to be like, hey, yeah, we're in a division with the Giants, the Eagles, and then Dallas for some random reason. But, like, I just don't know what they could do. And if the owner steps down, and it is the owner, like, doesn't that just put more pressure on teams like the Lions that have had the owners and they blame the owners for so long, and they're like, just leave. Leave. That's why, I mean, we joke about it on the show, but, like, the Packers not having an owner is a great time to buy into them, right? Like, you don't have to worry about, like, hey, the owners suck. You know? Like, let's get rid of them. It's like, all right, community-owned team, awesome. Why aren't there more of them? Well, because reasons, right? Because no one can make money off it, you know? I'm sure someone's making money off it. The money goes somewhere, right? So, I don't know. It's tough for me to, like, care about the owners. It's like, oh, they have it so rough. It's like, I don't care about that guy at all, right? I probably, if I saw Dan Snyder, I might recognize him, but I guarantee if I saw him in real life, I would never recognize him. It'd be a 0 out of 0. Unless he was all jacked up in like a suit. Now, my good friend, fellow owner Jerry Jones, I'd recognize, right? But most of the other owners, I don't know or care, right? So, what's the difference to me? Let's see. I want to see one of the teams, like, what's the Panthers? They push their owner out, and then their new owner's like kind of a jerk too. So it's like, all right, awesome. If I'm a Carolina fan, it's like, why am I really still cheering for this team? Tell me. Because, like, if you're the owner, you need to write a white paper or something. Like, tell me, why should I send money to you? Like, it's almost like Bob Nutting has scarred me so much. Where it's like, you brought up signing McCutcheon again. It's like, are people that naive that they're excited about McCutcheon? I had someone come at me too randomly about Penn State and James Franklin's record against Michigan and how it wasn't really that bad. And my first thought was, you have a better chance of Tony Gwynn getting a hit than seeing James Franklin beat Michigan, Matt. That's my final thought. And then I thought, wonder how low you could go, like which baseball player on the Pirates. Because some of these coaches have even lesser chance, right?
That's true.
Of winning. So, I don't know. Anything else you want to talk about? You want to bring up Florida State some more?
No, we made up for a season's worth of not really talking about them much.
What are you talking about? You talk about them all the time.
Well, we barely get the air that Michigan gets this season. We've been smited.
Well,
It's been duly noted.
Go undefeated and win a conference, Matt. I mean, you can only say you're back like Miami how many times? Which I did forget. I had one other note written down here because you talked about how coaches. Which team did you mention that for? Oh, Nick Saban when he leaves. So when Beamer left Virginia Tech, they were like one of the hottest teams. You mentioned them going to the ACC. Last year, Matt, they were like 78th in viewers. Not even in, like, you know how everyone had that mythical, like, there's going to be 64 top teams, and it definitely includes all the ACC teams. Virginia Tech was still one of the higher ACC ones. That's how bad the ACC is. Then have Virginia Tech be so low. It's almost like Florida State could just take those numbers in and say, look what you're doing. Look at it. That's what they should do. Wasn't that like the Hannibal movie or whatever? He puts a slideshow up and he's like, look at it. That's what you guys need to do. Put the numbers up with all the other athletic directors and tell them to look at their numbers. And then just walk out of the room. But hey, if you like that and you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe. Because I'm telling you, we know, like, we were able to call some of the stuff because we've been following this for so long. And I think a lot of the people, they hear, you're hearing a lot of numbers and stuff that are just being reported because that's what the television networks and the conferences want you to hear. ABC and ESPN don't want you to know that the Big Ten's making a ton more money than the SEC, because now they're going to have to pay the SEC more. And if they don't end up paying them more, they're not going to be paying for extra teams, that's for sure. Because then you're going to be coming in between a weird mid Big 12, Big 10, like middle team. And yeah, you can have the championships, but once the money runs out, that money's gone, like, right? Unless your boosters are going to keep paying and paying and paying, but with the expanded playoff, SEC gets less and less teams because they have less money. It's going to be harder for them to win championships. That's all I'm saying. You might have a Clemson get through and have a good run a couple years, but the other teams in that conference aren't going to be able to make up the money. They're not going to be able to make up the money, and those recruits are going to start going north. So if you want to hear more, like the show, subscribe, southboundsports.com. We also have a Patreon. You can hear some more and see the live stream if you want. And we will see you next week.